Okay, so hello and welcome. Dobry wieczór, good morning, wherever you are in the world. My name is Carolina Mechu from the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee in the United States. And I'm one of the two co-presidents of the Polish Studies Association. And the other half of the co-presidency is Jan Musekamp from the German Historical Institute in Warsaw. And on behalf of the Polish Studies Association, I would like to welcome you to today's book discussion. I want to thank Elisa Maria Hima for organizing this event today. And Elisa is also a PSA board member. And before I let her take over this event, I just want to say a few words about the PSA for those of you who don't know us yet, although I think most people probably do by now. So in short, the PSA is an international network of people with a scholarly or professional interest in the study of Poland. And we have a few activities that we do. Mostly we organize events such as this one, and we award a number of prizes. Those include the Best Article Prize, a dissertation award, a graduate student research award, and a syllabus award. And we award two prizes each year. And very soon you will hear about two prizes that we are giving out this year, and you will see the announcements for a dissertation prize and the syllabus award. And those will circulate to our members, but also on Age Poland, our LinkedIn page, which I would also like you to draw your attention to, as well as our Facebook page. We are still on Facebook. Very, very nice. So please stay tuned for details. And if you're not yet a member, please check out our activities and join us. I will share a link to our website. Your membership fee and any donation you might want to add goes directly to fund the prizes that we give out. And with that, I want to make those of you who just joined us aware that this is being recorded and will be available later on the PSA's YouTube channel, where you can also check out some of the past events that you might have missed. So with this, I want to again welcome everyone and turn over to Elisa.
Yeah, thank you, Carolina, for this introduction, and welcome everybody also from my side. Good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. And today we gathered to discuss a very exciting book that was released last year by Oxford University Press, and it's Anna Dobrowolska's book entitled Polish Sexual Revolutions, Negotiating Sexuality and Modernity Behind the Iron Curtains. I'm very excited about a short presentation with which we're going to start now by Anna Dobrowolska, followed by two comments that will be delivered by Natalia Jarska and Michał Wilczewski. But first, I would like to take 1 or 2 minutes to introduce actually the people today. I start with the author, with Anna Dobrowolska. She's a postdoctoral assistant at the Department of History at the University of Basel. She holds a PhD in history from the University of Oxford, and her research focuses on sexuality, visual culture, gender, and understate socialism. Between 2021 and 2024, she was a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Warsaw. In 2022, she received the Polish Science Foundation's Foundation Start Fellowship for Young Researchers. The first comment will be delivered by Natalia Jarska. She's also a historian, and she is associate professor at the Tadeusz Manteuffel Institute of History from the Polish Academy of Sciences. She's also the principal investigator in the project FemX, Women Experts and Feminist Knowledge Production in Post-War East Central Europe from 1945 to 1989. Her research also focuses on women and gender history, labor history, and the history of sexuality in post-war Poland. She authored the book in Polish released in 2015, Women of Marble, Women Workers in Poland, 1945 until 1960. And she has also a very long publication record, and her articles have appeared in journals such as Contemporary European History, Medical History, Women's History Review, Historical Journal, and the Slavic Review. Michał Wilczewski, who will add his comment too, holds a PhD also in history from the University of Chicago, where he is also the director of the undergraduate studies. He's a historian of modern East Central Europe with a focus on Poland and Polish culture. He's interested in the history of everyday life, and his current research project has the working title An Ecstasy of Filth, Pornography and Morality in Interwar Poland. And just to mention one of his recent publications, for example, the article Nurturing the Nation, Farm Wives and the Homemaking of the Modern Polish Countryside in the Interwar Period. Also, a few words about myself. I'm Elisa Maria Hima. I'm working at Freie Institut Berlin in the ERC project Democratizing the Family as a postdoc, where I investigate legal and social discourses on single and shared parenting and how motherhood and fatherhood are described and practiced after separation in the media, but also in legal terms. And my case studies are Poland and Hungary after 1945. So now you know who we actually are, and I would like to hand over now to Anna Dobrowolska, who's going to share with us her insights and some thoughts about her book.
Thank you, Elisa, for the introduction, and thank you for organizing this. I'm extremely grateful for this opportunity to share my work with you. And I'm gonna try to share the PowerPoint right now. Okay. This should be visible to you now, right?
Yes,
okay.
That works. Thank you.
Great. So yes, so I think I won't talk for too long because I think it's much more interesting to hear what Natalia and Michał have to say about the book, and also to hear any questions you might have. But I thought that I would like to present some like a very broad idea about what I think is the key contribution this book makes to the scholarship on the modern Polish history, and especially on the history of sexuality under state socialism. And for those of you who are interested in learning more, of course, you are more than welcome to read the book and look at the particular case studies that I explore there. So here is the table of contents. I tried to put it all into one slide so that it's pretty compact. And as you can see from the table of contents, this book actually takes a very broad take on the post-war Polish history of sexuality. So actually, I started with quite a narrow focus on the 1960s and 1970s, and then as this book developed and as my research developed, I kind of expanded it towards the neighboring decades. And actually, the book studies the history of sexuality in Poland from the early post-war period to the end of the socialist regime, to 1989, or even beyond it, as it ventures into the early 1990s and the discussions of sexuality in post-socialist Poland. And my main interest throughout this research has been on the category of the sexual revolution itself, and how this category helped people navigate and understand the discussions of sexuality and modernity under state socialism. And I will talk about it in a second, but methodologically speaking, this book is a bit of a mosaic, a bit of a patchwork of different methods, and it's very exciting for me to have this opportunity to actually put such different sources and such different methods into conversation with one another. Because what I felt at the very beginning when starting this project was a bit of a frustration with traditional historical methods and traditional archival research that glances over the questions of sexuality because they don't appear in traditional sources that historians usually work with. And then we come to the conclusion that, well, there was no sex under socialism because we haven't found it in the archive. But obviously that is not true. And if we, broaden our perspective and try to think more creatively about the sources we can use and what we can do with them, then actually the breadth and the wealth of discussions of sexuality under state socialism emerge. So this book kind of tries to piece it all together to make sense of state socialist sexual culture through this mosaic of different sources. So I work with visual culture. I work with print media. I work with nude photography, both in print media, but also nude photography exhibitions. I work with oral history interviews, both the ones that I conducted myself, but also the ones that other people have conducted. But I also look at traditional documents, so archival documents, trying to read them through a bit of a different lens, and I think that is also quite interesting in the way that it helps us produce new interpretations of the institutions and features of public life under socialism that we have not seen before because we haven't asked the right questions, and that is especially true for my discussion of censorship and pornography in chapter 4. Yes, so this is the very broad overview. And now to the 3 particular contributions I wanted to draw your attention to here. So the first contribution, and actually the main idea behind this research, is that actually sexual revolution is not a concrete, historical phenomenon that we can date to a particular time period, to a particular place, and then measure certain developments in sexual discourses and practices against this category. But rather it's a metaphor that people use and reuse, negotiate and renegotiate to make sense of the changing world around them. And in the case of state socialist Poland, that this category is especially interesting because it changes meaning throughout this 40 plus years of the state socialist regime. So from the early socialist revolution of gender roles that this picture of female tractor driver, visualizes very well, to the 1960s concern over youth morality and the impact the global sexual revolution has on Polish sexual mores, to the late 1980s renegotiation of sexuality in the increasingly fragmented late socialist economic and social life. And I think that is very interesting when we take this category as this broad metaphor and kind of go into the field, into the sources, and try to see what it actually means for the people who are using it at that time, often explicitly using the category of a sexual revolution, as here in that picture from an article Zbigniew Lewstarowicz wrote for Tygodnik Powszechny in 1971. But also more broadly when people speak about modernity and modernization and liberalization. And that is why the book uses both terms in the title. So it's about Polish sexual revolutions, but it's also about negotiating sexual modernity. Because I think when we kind of look more broadly and employ this category of sexual modernity, we see things that are distinctly socialist in this project of reforming Polish sexuality. And I think that this is also a very interesting angle for reinterpreting Polish post-war history. And the second contribution of this book is connected to the first one, and it is about challenging this West versus East binary, because a lot of this scholarship on the history of sexuality globally has been based on this assumption that there is the Western sexual revolution, and then maybe there is something happening in the East, but it's always completely separate from the West, right? And I think what's been very exciting in the recent years when it comes to the scholarship on the history of sexuality in Eastern Europe is that actually more and more people started challenging and questioning this binary and actually showing the deep embeddedness of East European, in this case Polish, culture, not only sexual culture, but culture more general, in the global processes that take place in the second half of the 20th century. And here, in this book, I shed light on the transmissions of discourses, transmissions of visual frameworks that travel across the Iron Curtain, not only from the West to the East, but also from the East to the West. And kind of inform people's understanding of what sexual modernity is, or what it could be like, and what is the difference between capitalist sexual modernity and socialist sexual modernity, and how important this distinction is at one point at the time, and then how it slowly fades into background in the late socialist period. And here's just some pictures from my vast collection of state socialist erotic objects. On the left, you actually see with the flowers as a censoring method. You can actually see reprints from the American Playboy that appeared in the Polish press in the early 1970s. And on the right-hand side, you see covers from the Polish Playboy magazine, and the T inside is a very important one because it's an unofficial Polish knockoff of the American Playboy that kind of translates the visual frameworks that we know from Western soft pornographic media into the Polish context and into the context of the late socialist economic crisis. And in the middle, the picture that could, as well be a picture from the US in the 1960s, but actually is a picture from the Warsaw Student Club Hybrydy in 1960, I think. So we see that the distinction between the West and the East that has so long informed our understanding of sexuality in the second half of the 20th century is actually much more fluid and much more negotiable. And we see much more once we start questioning this distinction. And I hope this book contributes to this process. And the third and final contribution that I wanted to draw your attention to is what I call the queering of heterosexuality. Because I think that what has been a great development in the history of sexuality in the region in the past few years is the explosion of queer history and the explosion of the interest in queer history and different ways in which people engage with state socialist past through the analytical frameworks that queer theory offers us. But what remained unchallenged until very recently is heterosexuality, which kind of appears as this constant dominant norm that never changes, that is never challenged. And what I felt was particularly important for me when writing this book was to use the analytical tools that queer history gives us to try to historicize and to queer history of heterosexuality, to show how heterosexuality under state socialism was also a negotiated and historically fluid norm, and how it was produced and reproduced in social relations through performances of sexuality, such as beauty pageants, such as striptease shows, and through the development of the expert discourse on sexuality and sexology, as the picture of Zbigniew Lewsterowicz. Again, he reappears. I actually haven't realized that before. But Zbigniew Lewsterowicz, one of the most prominent Polish sexologists, here at the bottom of this slide. So in a way, trying to think critically through how heterosexuality has developed under state socialism, to question its essential and dominant character in Polish culture, and actually point to many different versions of heterosexuality, many different performances of heterosexuality that opens space for contestation of heterosexuality as the only norm. Yes, and then with this conclusion, I think I will end my remarks. For those of you who are interested in my collection of erotic memorabilia from the state socialist era, I have an Instagram profile where you can follow my attempts at navigating the censorship of the algorithm that surprisingly is much more strict than the censorship of state socialist media. Yeah, and now I'm looking forward to hearing what Michał and Natalia have to say about the book. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anna, for this introduction and three important aspects of your book. And yeah, it's true. I also follow your Instagram. I recommend it to all of you. It's really insightful, but I'm always shocked how strict the censorship actually is there. It's weird. Okay, I think we start with the comment by Natalia, right? So in the order of the program. So Natalia, please share your comment with us.
Thanks so much. Thank you, Elisa, for your introduction. Thank you, Anya, for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here. Can you hear me? Well, it's okay. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to share my some of my comments. I also included in a review I published recently in the Journal of Social History, but I assume nobody has read it, so it won't be totally boring for you and repetitive. So I would like to make, I guess, 3 points. The first one is related to the historiography of sexuality in post-war state socialist Europe and beyond. So in the last 10 or maybe even 15 years, it has been a dynamically developing field, pretty well connected to international debates. And yet nobody, to my knowledge, has ever so explicitly utilized the concept of sexual revolution to address changes in sexuality in any of the countries of the region. Dagmar Herzog has suggested we should use rather the term sexual evolution as a more adequate term, while Katarzyna Leszkowa in her book on Czechoslovakia talked about sexual liberation. Sexual Liberation Socialist Studies is the title of her book. And it's maybe a paradox because Poland is usually regarded as the, less advanced on the path of to sexual openness. When it comes to, for example, modern contraception, it was less popular among Poles until the very end of, say, socialism than it was in neighboring countries. Divorce rates were lower, and Catholicism has had a huge impact on sexual norms and even on expertise, state-funded expertise, as some scholars have shown. And yet Anya decided to search for sexual revolution in such a country, detaching the concept and the notion from its usual capitalist and liberal Western context. And this was possible. Anya already has talked about it, so I'll maybe repeat it. Thanks to a novel approach, really, because she asks how people understood, related to, and experienced the sexual revolution and how they engaged with the concept. And this shift to subjectivities is a productive way to uncover diverse negotiations over sexuality between various state and non-state actors. And I think what the book does is also it broadens the scope of the actors usually taken into account. You read about custom officers, right? For example, not only about experts and policymakers. So in the end, the story we are offered is not that of backwardness, absence, and oppression, but that of negotiation, of sort of pushing the boundaries of what was acceptable and normalized. Crucially, also, it is not a story in which sexual revolution becomes yet another modernizing force coming from the West. Edward Gierek bought some Western technologies, and there was also the sexual revolution going, together with this. Actually, not, because Anya shows its critical reception. There was a third way, as she calls it, between this prudishness on the one hand and commodification and objectification on the other. So Western sexual revolution was not rejected, but was rather critically received, paving the way to greater sexual openness. Phenomena such as pornography and sexual content in advertising became accessible and tolerated. At the same time, these changes were embedded in discussions on socialist sexual modernity, which attempted to question capitalist frameworks. So the local context always influenced how certain phenomena associated with the sexual revolution developed. And this is why a study on Polish sexual revolution really contributes to the rethinking and really historicizing the understanding of sexual revolution. The second point, and it goes with the question, has to do with the progressiveness of the Polish sexual revolution. Because Ania shows convincingly how from the 1970s onwards, openly discussing sex and the presence of erotic images were not considered contradictory to socialism. There was a version of accepted socialist erotic culture which turned out to be quite liberal. Even attitudes to pornography, officially illegal, were shifting on the level of states' policies and the everyday practices of custom officers. The state, again, contrary to what is often argued, was far from being prudish and conservative. Yet, importantly, Anya shows it's really in, I think, all the case studies you analyze, that the Polish sexual revolutions were profoundly heteropatriarchal. So while at the onset of the debate, some of its actors advocated gender equality as a prerequisite of socialist modernization, in practice, women's bodies were increasingly objectified to the extent that they were explicitly talked about as the best of Polish export goods. So I guess it is a quite fresh perspective, also like a contribution to our understanding of late-stage socialist gender regimes, because it also complicates the often oversimplified argument about conservative gender roles at the time, the rise of Catholicism in public sphere, economic crisis, so on and so forth. But then I have a question. Whether and how did women challenge these objectifying narratives and practices? Whether any voices, I don't know, in art, but also in written, in publications of any sorts, sort of trying to challenge this objectification. Or is your analysis adding to this pretty gloomy picture of increasing gender oppression in, let's say, socialist Poland? You have talked about the sources, Anya, so I won't repeat it. You call it patchwork. I would say it's a beautifully crafted patchwork of a lot of interesting sources. Not only kind of this diversity is really impressive, but also how you analyze them. This is really fantastic. So even if somebody is not interested in particular in the history of sexuality, they should read the book, because of this like really amazing historical workshop Anya provides in the book. And I'll skip this comment, but maybe I'll ask then a different question. So who was actually the main driving force behind the Polish sexual revolution? Because I was today reading partially, like I read the blurb, right? And then I read here the monograph reassesses the role played by communist state in modernizing their citizens' approaches to sex. Then I was just wondering, because after reading the book, I think that it's maybe not the state actually who was acting, right? I'm thinking about what is maybe bottom-up reforming of the state, like who you would say were the crucial actors in this process. And well, maybe I'll end here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Natalia. I suggest to collect the questions maybe and to hear first Michał's comment, and then you can just answer to both of them.
Great. All right. Well, thank you. Thanks so much to the PSA for hosting this event. It's really, there's been so many wonderful events in the last couple of months, so it's great to see that our field is so vibrant and that we have the opportunity to come together to meet virtually. And it whets my appetite and gets me very excited for what I'm sure is going to be a fun PSA meeting at ACES later on this year. So hopefully we'll see folks in person. So my greatest thanks to Elisa for organizing this, to Natalia for her comments. And especially to Anya for writing such a dynamic, enjoyable, and really stellar book that I think will completely revolutionize the way we think about sexuality in post-war Poland and the socialist sphere. And so, of course, if you were to ask many of us just a couple of years ago whether or not there was a sexual revolution in Poland, we probably all would have turned our heads to the side and looked confusedly at one another And for too long, the answer to that question might have been sort of a clear no, right? Sex shops didn't arrive in Poland until 1990. And much of what we've been led to believe about the arrival of sexuality to Poland had to do with the collapse of communism, the arrival of capitalism, and Poland's, and lately, right, so many accusations about, the effects of Poland's accession to the European Union and what that's meant for Polish sexual morality. But as Anya shows us in her incredible book, not only was there a sexual revolution in socialist Poland, but we might better actually understand it as a series of sexual revolutions in the plural, right? And so indeed, in the 40-year period that she studies in her book, we see tremendous political and cultural shifts in attitudes towards sexuality and sex and sexuality. And very importantly, she's concerned not about how people and she's not concerned about the question of whether or not there was a sexual revolution or not, right? But rather how people thought about these changes and transformations, right? And whether they thought that there was one happening rather than this larger question of a yes or no. And so from the relatively early legalization of abortion in 1956 to the exhibition of nude photographs in art galleries to the explosion of nude pocket calendars and the normalization of striptease as an ordinary part of a night out, Poles experimented and pushed the limits of their sexual imaginations. But as Anya shows us, this was most frequently done in service to socialist sexual modernity. The state, being sort of dead set on proving its modernity at the time, justified its stance on abortion, for example, through scientific and social realities, right? Recognizing that poverty is going to impact a woman's ability to raise a child, right? In order to also set itself against the conservative stances of the Catholic Church. Similarly, the rise of nude photography, Anya tells us, was not subject to censorship specifically because the nude was sort of reimagined as tasteful and non-pornographic, even instructive compared to the pornographic images produced for mass consumption and exploitative purposes under capitalist structures. But at the same time, and this was just so wonderfully clever, Anya, it could also be a commentary on socialist life, right? One of my favorite images being one of the ones that you just had in your slideshow, but the back of the woman with the toilet paper wrapped around her neck, holding the two bags, right? And sort of this commentary on what life under socialism looked like. What I think is so wonderful and so powerful about Anya's book is that it recasts our understanding of sex under state socialism from this imagined prudishness and the realm of the taboo to a series of active and vibrant political and sexual debates about what socialist sexual modernity could mean and the various possibilities wrapped up within that, right? Neither the state nor the population was nearly as prudish or pearl-clutching as we might have been led to believe. Though they certainly did recognize the primacy of heteronormative and heteropatriarchal structures. I think Anya talks very clearly about that over other non-conforming sexualities, and that'll be part of my concluding comments. But importantly, Anya shows us that the state was not merely decreeing its stance on sexuality unilaterally from party headquarters in Warsaw, but that the sexual revolutions of the period under question were the result of a series of negotiations between the state and ordinary people. So young people, for example, with their increasingly globalized connections, learned about and craved the fashions and attitudes and behaviors that they read about in state-sanctioned youth periodicals. And periodical editors knew what they were doing when they began to use nudes in their various publications, advertising anything from textiles to vacations. And indeed, rather than categorically shut such operations down, state censors were constantly changing their standards to reflect new cultural shifts reacting to Poles' desires. And lest there be any confusion, Anya shows us that there was quite the Polish appetite for sexual and sexualized content under state socialism, and that it was much more accessible than we might have been led to believe. And one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about lately is how we might find desire in the archives and in the sources, right? Rather than thinking about sexuality through the realm of panic or this idea of panic all the time. And I think Anya does a really tremendous job of showcasing desire and how we might be able to think about what Poles actually wanted versus how they were reacting to things sort of negatively. There's so much that I could say, but in the interest of time, I want to focus, I think, on one component of this book that I think is hugely important and makes for me one of the most important historiographical contributions to the field of sexuality studies. As Anya mentioned, in her own comments, right, the book is largely about heterosexual and heteronormative sex, and how we might understand heterosexuality as a negotiated category, right? One that's also in flux and under construction. And if sex was going to be palatable and acceptable under state socialism, she shows that it was not without specific parameters, right? Heteronormative sex was the sex that was considered acceptable, so much so that it was quite easy to smuggle in straight pornography across the border, but one might expect to be arrested or interrogated if they were, say, to bring in gay pornography across the border. I love the idea, or I love the one instance, Anya, also where the cops let off somebody who was smuggling pornography in, as long as they gave them some, right? So they could just sort of go under the radar and just go across the border without any problems. But of course, any sexuality or sexual identity that might have stepped out of that norm, or as liberal and progressive as the state could sometimes be, right, was still deemed contrary to socialist modernity. Maybe not necessarily because of its sexual deviance, but because it was believed that those types of sexual deviances might have led to other deviant behavior, right? So being gay might lead to drug use and might lead to sexual assault and so on and so forth, right? And so these were, of course, behaviors that were, unbecoming of a socialist citizen. But nonetheless, in her last chapter, Anya shows us how the lives of the LGBTQ community managed to thrive under state socialism. And I think really importantly, rather than focus on the oppression sexual minorities faced, especially during Operation Hyacinth, right, which we often kind of think of as Poland's Stonewall moment, Anya shows how gay rights organizations worked to carve out a space for themselves toward the end of this socialist period. But very importantly for the historiography, Anya doesn't treat these groups in isolation. And I think all too often we see sort of the histories of heterosexuality and homosexuality is written separately from one another. And seldom do the two intersect in any meaningful way. But in her book, Anya writes about the two in tandem, showing how it would have been impossible for gay rights organizations to organize had it not been for the 40 years of sexual revolutions that Poland had been experiencing since at least the Second World War. And I think we can absolutely argue that those sexual revolutions have been happening for much longer than that, right? Earlier. But were it not for the rise of prominent sexologists or the softening of censorship around nudity or the transformative arrival of the VCR and home video, all of which contributed to the negotiated and constructed nature of sexuality, of heterosexuality in particular, the space for these gay organizations to organize might not have been possible. And so here we see how the two are intertwined, how heterosexuality and homosexuality as histories, as constructed categories, can be written together rather than sort of thought about in these separate ways. So Anya, I think, invites us to show the interconnectedness of hetero and homosexualities and invites us to study them together. So a couple of questions for Anya. As you know, I wrote about the countryside in a past life, and I'm curious if you might be able to talk a little bit about how this sexual revolution might have played out in the countryside. If you think that there were any substantial differences between the rural and urban spheres, is there a rural sexual modernity? Does it look different? How might that play it out? You also don't address the church very much in the book, and I'm sort of relieved that you don't, right? Because I think that's sort of the expected angle to take, or one of the expected angles to take. But I'm curious if you just might expand a little bit more on the church, and is the church dynamic in any of its reactions to this? Is it sort of one side, sort of unilateral in its ideas, or is there also some sort of dynamism within its ideas? But in general, Anya, I just want to congratulate you on this book. I think not only has it changed so many assumptions of my own assumptions about sexuality in communist Poland, but it's really just a really excellent example of accessible writing. I think I could very easily see myself assigning this book to my undergraduates in my seminar in sexuality. Just the way that it's organized, the clarity of your writing, and to piggyback on Natalia's comment, like just the inventive way that you use the sources is just really a masterclass of book writing. So congratulations and thanks.
Thank you, Michał, for another very interesting, thought-provoking comment. And Anna, please take your time to answer the questions you have been asked.
Yeah, that is a bit overwhelming. All the hearing all these nice things, and I especially appreciate the last comment, Michał, you made about the writing style, because being a non-native English speaker, it has always been my the greatest fear to have my writing published and assessed in English. But I think it's also a benefit to some extent to be a non-native English speaker, because then you have no other choice. You have to write in a simple way, right? So I think I hope that I managed to strike the balance between making a nuanced argument but writing in a fairly simple and accessible way. Yeah, thank you so much for all these comments, and it's so it's so incredible to hear how people react to the writing and what people pick out of all the different examples, and also like to remind myself of what's inside the book, because it's been quite some time since I finished writing the manuscript, and now you mention all these examples. I'm like, oh yeah, really, that was so interesting to write. So yes, that's great. And maybe let's start with the big elephant in the room, which is the Michał's question about the Catholic Church. Because yeah, this is a question that appears always whenever I'm presenting this research. So I kind of have a pre-rehearsed response. I will not go into that pre-rehearsed response. I will try to go deeper into the methodological choices here. And I would first say that the Catholic Church is present in this book, but it's not at the forefront. And I think that is a very important distinction to make. So just like I'm trying to interweave the history of heterosexuality with the history of queer experiences, when they kind of come into contact with each other, or where we have sources that kind of illuminate both, the same is true for the Catholic Church. So where there are cases where for the negotiations or on nudism, for example, there are documents that point to a role played by Catholic priests and Catholic Church hierarchy, then that appears, right? But it's one of a very important goals of this book was not to privilege the Catholic perspective. And I think that this is so important, because the dominant way of writing Polish history is always through the lens of Catholicism, and no one ever has to explain why they write about Catholicism, as if it was the only way of looking at Polish history. And I think if there is a period in Polish history when Catholicism is least important, I would say that this is exactly that period, because we have a very strong state structure that is openly secular. It negotiates with the Catholic Church. It's not that it's ignores religion completely, and obviously the Catholic Church still has a very prominent political role, but still the official state ideology is a secular ideology. And I think it's so important to question the traditional ways in which we are writing about Polish history, and kind of try to see the church as just one of the actors, not the privileged actor, and then see where that leads us. And obviously, I think that there is a great book to be written about the Catholic history of sexuality in Poland, right? There's been some research recently that has been trying to do that. And I've been super excited to read that. But this is not this book, right? This book is on the way in which people engage with sexual modernity and socialist sexual modernity in particular. And there are Catholics who engage with socialist sexual modernity as well. And I write about them. I write about the Catholic intelligentsia and how in the 1960s, the Catholic intelligentsia circles tried to reimagine modern Catholic sexuality in a very similar way to the socialist discussions of modern sexuality. So in that way, there are certain places where these two perspectives kind of align and the stories can be written alongside each other. But then there are places where they diverge. And I think it's important to acknowledge that not all Polish history has to be Catholic history. So that would be the methodological justification behind it, or more of theoretical justification. And then the actual practical justification behind it is obviously the access to the archives and how difficult it is to write a history of the Catholic Church, being a non-Catholic researcher, right? Not being affiliated in any way, not having any institutional credentials that allow you the access into the archives. And there are people, for example, Agata Ignaciuk, who have been doing incredible research in Catholic archives, but it's very difficult, and it's, and then that again is a different project, because that is a project about Catholicism, and this project was not about Catholicism. It was about sexual revolution and sexual modernity. So there are all these layers that need to be considered. But for those of you who haven't read the book, the Catholic Church is there, and you can make a I don't know, a drinking game or whatever, trying to look for the mentions of the Catholic Church in each of the chapters, because I think they appear in every single chapter actually. And then the even bigger elephant in the room, which is the countryside and the rural versus urban divide. And that is a question that I have been asking myself recently, even more than I had when I did this research, because the character of the sources that I'm working with kind of privileged the perspective of the city centers, the urban areas, also middle class perspective. That it's because it's print media. The print media is usually published in big city centers, right? So in that sense, it is a very urban story, and I don't think it would be the same book. It wouldn't be a book about visual culture and the media discourse and the public negotiations of sexuality without taking this urban middle class perspective, because these are the social groups that shape this public discussions of sexuality. But I don't think that necessarily means that the urban actors, the rural actors, are absent from this story. And I've seen it in various places. When I analyze letters that people send to the censorship, for example, or to magazine, to newspaper, to editors, that you see that people send them from both cities and from the countryside, right? And it's also not necessarily that the critical conservative letters are coming from the countryside and then the liberal ones are coming from the city centers. It's much more diverse. So I think it's important to kind of to look beyond this binary that there is a liberal city and a backward countryside, especially in Poland, the post-war Poland, where the division is between the West and the East rather than between the city and the countryside in many regards. Yes, so that would be the quick response to that. And then to questions that Natalia posed, another big elephant in the room, the feminist question. And again, it is there somehow between the lines. For practical reasons, a chapter that explicitly addressed feminism and the feminist challenge to this visions of socialist sexual modernity is actually not in the book. It's a standalone article that you can all read in Aspasia. It was published in 2023, I think. And in that chapter, I kind of analyzed the nude photography, exhibitions, and the vision of socialist morality they promote against the works and writings of feminist artists such as Natalia LL, Eva Partum, and Teresa Murak, and to kind of try to see what these women's artists are doing, not as a challenge to prudishness of the Polish society, but rather as a challenge to this very particular version of heteropatriarchal sexual modernity that is on the rise at the time when they are producing their works. So in that sense, that is where the feminist voices are. But again, I think that this is another work that still waits to be written. And I think that what I would like to think that what I'm doing is kind of providing a good stepping stone for someone else, or maybe myself in the future, to do that work, to kind of try to think critically about the way the woman feminists, that is a great debate, right? Engaged with these visions of sexual morality under socialism. And I think we were doing a bit of a small part of it in the project that Natalia and Anina Gagijeva are running, which is on feminist expertise under socialism. And there we were like looking at the women experts and how they engage with these issues. And I think that there, the question of sexual morality kind of comes up in very unexpected places. So it's also interesting, how sometimes you don't look for things and then they appear. And how this research kind of needs to be done collaboratively, because one person cannot see all the diverse contexts that are there. And the final question about the driving force behind the Polish sexual revolutions. And I admit that the blurb is a bit of a clickbait, so to say, because it's actually not the state, right? Like the quote that Antalya mentioned, that it's reassesses the role that the communist state played in shaping Polish sexuality. The reassessment is actually that it was not the main actor, because there wasn't one dominant actor. And I think that is part of the methodology that I try to develop here, is to actually look at this multipolar picture, right? Where there are many actors, there are many levels of interactions, and it isn't a top-down history that the communist state comes and says we have a sexual revolution and then we have a sexual revolution. Obviously, there are some important social and economic policies that facilitate certain transformations of morality and discussions of sexuality. But this is, again, one of the layers. And then there are layers where people, middle-level actors, like editors of these magazines, nudist activists, people who are, sending letters to various institutions, how they, engage and renegotiate the meanings of sexual morality under socialism. And then there's also the grassroots level, right? People doing things, in their daily lives. And this is so difficult to study because we very rarely have the sources. But when we clearly see that this is, it's not a story of a top-down imposition, but it's also not a story of totally grassroots movement, right? It is much complicated. And that is why it's been so difficult to study, because we are, it's easier to study binary histories, right? When we have right or wrong, black and white. And this story is very much about different people and negotiations that are going on and also changing over time. So there is not one conclusion that one can draw from them, I would say. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Anna, for your answers. I think we still have a couple of minutes left for one or two quick questions, quick answers. So I open the floor to our guests and listeners. Maybe there is a question you would like to to have answered, something that comes to your mind. Yeah, Winston, please.
Yeah. Oops, sorry. Hi. Yeah, thanks for this very fascinating talk. And I'm interested in sort of what Michal mentioned about some maybe continuities with previous sexual revolutions. Is there something that you could add to that, or especially sort of even the occupation of the Second World War, what that might have done to influence the period that you're looking at? Thank you.
Yeah, shall we collect or shall I answer immediately? Maybe someone has another question.
I was muted. Yeah, so if there's a second question, maybe it makes sense to collect them. If not, I would actually have one. So you were also mentioning you worked with interviews. You also provided on your own, and we all know Godsee's catchy title, "Did Women Have Better Sex Under Socialism?" I was just wondering what kind of answers did you get in these interviews, and if you can expand on that. Thanks.
Yeah, I didn't actually ask this question. I didn't ask a question. Did you have sex under socialism?
Maybe you could draw some conclusions from that. Yeah.
But the interviews that I conducted were for one particular part of the project, which was about the nudist movement, and that is also my book that came out in Polish 2 years ago. So there we in this project we asked questions about the like the history of nude activism and nude organizing. So it wasn't that much about sex as about the public performances of sexuality. And what I think was very interesting in these conversations is that I initially assumed that people would be reluctant to speak and that they would like their anonymity to be preserved. And then as we started approaching potential interviewees, what was quite striking is that people actually wanted to give an interview on the condition that their names are mentioned, right? And then I realized, well, that actually makes sense. You know, when you're a nude activist, like you enjoy sunbathing naked on the beach, like what do you have to hide, right? Like you already transgressed all the norms. But that was an interesting observation for me because it kind of led me to confronting my own preconceived notions about what is the shame and how people talk about their experiences of embodied experiences in the past. So in that sense, that was very, very interesting in the interviews. And then the other part of the oral history methodology that this book draws on is actually not on the interviews I did myself. And I find that it was such an interesting experience to actually analyze interviews that are available in publicly, like open repositories. That interviews that were conducted on completely different things, right? They had no mention of sexuality in the title whatsoever. No one asked questions about sexuality. And then as I typed, my search words in the transcripts and tried to search for them, then there, kind of a narrative about attending a striptease performance comes up. And I actually think that this is the only way we can elicit such testimonies. Because if I did actually wanted to interview people about their experience of going to striptease performances, that is extremely difficult. I tried doing that. No one actually came forward to my interviewee call. So it's rather about reading between the lines in other interviews that are conducted on other topics and trying to be very creative with the way we look for things. And I think that this is also the future of oral history, because we've done so many oral history interviews in the past few decades. And if we follow the open data principles, whatever, and actually these transcripts end up in public repositories, that is such a wealth of data that can be creatively reinterpreted in the future. So I think that was very, very interesting in the way of thinking differently about what oral history can actually mean for academic practice. And the question about continuity, it is such an interesting case when you look at the legal frameworks. Actually, the legal frameworks that govern, morality in state socialist Poland until 1969 are the pre-war penal code. So the regulations on pornography remain unchanged. Actually, until 1997, we have the same legislation on pornography that we had in the interwar period until 1997. And then the decriminalization of homosexuality from the 1932 penal code that stays in place and is unchallenged, in the state socialist period. So in the sense of the legal framework, that actually there is a continuity, and no one sees a point in changing that. The only change that is introduced in 1969 concerns homosexual prostitution, which is decriminalized in 1969, and that follows the broader, shift into the so-called abolitionist framework of regulating prostitution when Poland enters the UN Convention on against trafficking in 1952. I wrote a separate book on that, so if someone is interested, that is there. But I think it's quite interesting that actually the legal framework doesn't change that much. And there are also some inspirations from the interwar period that activists, for example, draw. And I think that the most interesting example is obviously the Towarzystwo Świadomego Macierzyństwa, the Conscious Motherhood Society, right? So the family planning organization that is established in 1957, but it really draws on the interwar tradition and on Bojżeleński and Irena Krzywicka and all of these discussions, right? So that they are, reimagined in the new reality. Their position, what the activists can do is very different, but people are often the same, right? People, like when you look at the actual people, they're sometimes the continuity is also there. So I think the next step would be to actually write this history, kind of ignoring that caesura, or maybe problematizing it in a different way, right? Trying to look at the first half of the 20th century in this longer perspective and see how these discussions actually develop over in this different political context. But obviously and that will be my final point, sorry. But obviously the Second World War is a very important reference point. And especially it is a reference point when it comes to defining morality and defining women's morality in particular. And you see that in the discussions of sex work and prostitution in particular, how people in the early post-war period, they discuss the alleged problems with Polish women's morality as a direct result of the German demoralization, right? And how that then plays into this nationalist discourse that lingers throughout the state socialist period well into the 1980s. And how the foreign interferences into Polish sexuality are portrayed as a danger to national integrity, and perhaps even into the 1990s and 2000s, because we see that in contemporary discussions as well. So there is a certain continuity of discourses that can be traced there as well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. Yeah, and I look at the time. I think, it's already time to conclude this session and this very interesting book presentation and discussion. Thanks again, Anna, and congratulations on this wonderful book. Thank you, Micha. Thank you, Natalia, for the comments. And thank you, everybody, for being here. I was wondering if Carolina has something to say, like organization-wise for upcoming events or something.
No, I think right now I don't have anything else to say, but please stay tuned for announcements coming out. And yes, thank you very much for organizing this fascinating discussion. And it was really, yeah, fascinating. And I hope everybody has a nice day, evening, afternoon, wherever you are. And we hope to see you at the next PSA event.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
So
you.
yeah, have a nice day, evening, and see you soon. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.